Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. I do have one quick favor before we get to the video that you came here for, and that is very simply this. You see that little red subscribe button below this video? Go ahead, smash that subscribe button. It really does help me. It really does help this channel grow and my audience grow. So go ahead and hit that red subscribe button. And now, here is the video that you came here for. Craziness in the streets, another coaching search in Knoxville as Jeremy Pruitt has been fired as the head coach of the University of Tennessee. And I'll be honest, I don't know that this is really, truly surprising. I want to give a quick shout out to my buddy Trey Wallace, who is one of the radio hosts in Fox Sports Knoxville. He hosts on Fox Sports Knoxville, He's a good friend of mine. He may actually be coming on this show later this week. And he was the one that really broke this story from the beginning. He had some good reporting early on, right around the end of the season, that there was some major recruiting violations going on. So that happens. Tennessee launches an internal investigation. They hire an outside lawyer firm. And sure enough, bing, bang, boom, major stuff happens, and Jeremy Pruitt is out. In terms of the details, in terms of what you need to know, a couple things. One, we don't have all the details because, let's be honest, we've all followed enough NCAA investigations to know that it may be weeks, months, maybe years before we get all the details. But essentially, it all centers around what Trey reported on about 5 weeks ago when the regular season ended, which was major recruiting violations at the University of Tennessee. Again, we don't have all the details, but it sounds like some recruits were helped along the way, maybe with some travel stuff on recruiting visits, maybe with hotel accommodations that were not above board, especially on unofficial visits, which are supposed to be paid for out of the student-athlete's pocket. Official visits the school can pay for. Unofficial visits are not allowed to be paid for by the school. But the bottom line remains some recruiting violations, and it wasn't just a one-off thing, right? I think that's the important thing to realize is that the Tennessee chancellor, the person who runs the university, had a press conference on Monday, and she basically said, one, Tennessee is looking at multiple level 1 rules violations, and level 1 and level 2, and also that it was pretty wide-ranging. This wasn't a rogue one assistant coach, but in addition to Jeremy Pruitt, 2 assistant coaches were fired, a couple recruiting staff members, a couple analysts. So basically, it is very clear that multiple people were working behind the scenes and did illegal stuff, did things that violated NCAA rules. And listen, we argue about NCAA rules all the time, but we know what the rule book is. We know what's allowed. We know what's not allowed. And if you don't follow those NCAA rules, you are going to be punished. And so multiple people were fired, and obviously a lot of it is going to fall on Jeremy Pruitt, right? You can get away with this if it is one assistant coach, if you can claim that it's rogue, if you can claim that you had nothing to do with it. But when we're talking 8, 10, 12 people that were involved. I think it was something like close to 10 at the very least. It's going to be really hard for a coach to kind of claim that it was an isolated incident and that he either had no idea or shouldn't have known. And it certainly doesn't help when you're 16 and 19, coming off a 3-7 season. But even if he had come off a successful season, I don't think it would have been very easy for him to survive this. But he is out. And in a very interesting note, I also think it's important to note that Philip Fulmer, the former head coach who hired him, has also been fired. Well, he quote-unquote retired, but he was basically fired. And so the search for a new athletic director and a new head coach is underway. Before we get into those details, first of all, I just want to say this, man. And I've said this on the show before, but it is another knock on Tennessee football. And it's just crazy to me because if you're a follower of college football, if you're passionate, we have a lot of young people that listen to this show, under 25, under 20, under 30. I'm in my mid-30s, and I'm just telling you right now, it is insane to me to see how fast Tennessee has fallen. When I came up watching college football, I've told this story before, but Tennessee football, I started watching college football in the mid-90s. Tennessee football was essentially the equivalent of what like Ohio State or Oklahoma is today. Not quite Alabama, not quite the best of the best, but every single year they were at least in the conversation for the national championship. All those Peyton Manning years, which is when I first started getting into college football. And then, of course, after that, they won a national championship with T. Martin at quarterback. So to see this program fall so far, so fast, so quickly, and into such a deep hole of despair, I just absolutely cannot believe it. So as we look ahead to what's next for Tennessee, it's just going to be fascinating. And it's fascinating for a number of reasons, right? Because if you kind of just follow the tea leaves, follow the news, on Monday, the big story is, of course, Jeremy Pruitt being fired. However, I would add that I actually think that is secondary to the fact that Philip Fulmer has resigned as the AD at the University of Tennessee. Why do I bring that up? Why is it important? Well, it's for one very simple reason. You know who hires a football coach? An athletic director. And so while the bigger story is Jeremy Pruitt being fired, who is the next Tennessee football coach, the real story is who the heck does Tennessee hire as an athletic director? Because it's going to be impossible to really hire a football coach until you figure out who that football coach is going to be working for. No coach anywhere, as good of a job as Tennessee is, and I still think it's a good job, and there's only 14 SEC coaching jobs, and I think every SEC coaching job, except maybe Vandy, has certain advantages that other schools and other conferences simply don't. Until you get that AD in place, there is no reason for me to think that there will be a head coach in place, and so that is something to monitor when it comes to Tennessee. I think this could be a long, drawn-out process because I don't think that Tennessee is going to have an AD in place for a fair amount of time. And until they have that AD, I find it very hard to hire a head football coach. The question, of course, after that becomes, what kind of coach wants to take this job? Because I think we'll get into kind of candidates and all that stuff in a minute, but I do think it is going to be fascinating to see how you even go about hiring a football coach. Because first of all, I think it goes without saying, right? Any head coach that has a good job is not going to take this job. Not because I don't think Tennessee is good, because I do think it's a good job, but because you just don't know what is coming. As I said a few minutes ago to lead this show, NCAA investigations, first of all, you got to hire an AD, period. So first of all, I don't think it's going to be hard to find a candidate, first of all, because they don't know who they're going to be working for. But on top of that, they don't know what's coming from the NCAA. And as I said a minute ago, it takes time for these NCAA investigations to unfold. So we're not just talking about hiring a football coach. We're talking about hiring a football coach at the very beginning of an NCAA investigation. And so you can promise the world to a football coach, but if he has no idea what is coming from the NCAA, I think it is going to be hard to find the right coach to fit the profile of this job. Because what are the violations going to be? How bad is it? What are you going to have scholarship reductions? Are you going to have bowl bans? By the way, are you going to self-impose bowl bans? And by the way, you're not even going to find out what actually happens from the NCAA until 2 or 3 years down the road. So to even begin this conversation, I think it's important to note that, whoever is hired is going to be recruiting under an NCAA cloud for the next probably 2 to 3 years before they even get a verification on what happens from the NCAA. And then beyond that, they're going to have to deal with the actual NCAA punishment, which again, could be scholarship reductions, could be all that kind of stuff, could be major bowl bans, all that kind of stuff. So with that said, it's going to be a fascinating coaching search. And I think the question now becomes, who are realistic candidates, right? Because first of all, it's the last coaching search that we expect to have this offseason, so it's going to be kind of under the microscope to begin with. It's an SEC job. It's a major program with a lot of history, so everyone's kind of curious as to what is going to happen. But I think it's just going to be fascinating to watch what kind of people are interested, who takes it, and who can and cannot take it. First of all, like I said a minute ago, I do not believe that a good coach with a good job at the Power 5 level is going to take it, right? You're not getting somebody from any Power 5 school to come to Tennessee to clean up this mess. I don't even know who would be a candidate under those circumstances, but I don't think you are going to get a person that is at a Power 5 school now to take this job, so you could go ahead and cross those people off the list. The second thing, and this really sucks, and I feel bad for Tennessee fans, but I think when you fire a head coach for NCAA rules violations and you go out and hire a new AD to clean up this mess, I think that because Jeremy Pruitt was fired for NCAA rules violations and not just for being a lousy football coach, which he was, there are certain candidates that I don't think you can hire anybody who has a background with NCAA rules violations, right? I just don't think that you can do it. So Hugh Freeze, who I believe is probably the best candidate for this coaching job and a guy who we know wants this job. He coached high school ball in Tennessee. He started his college coaching career. Well, I think he technically started as like a GA at Ole Miss, but he has spent time in Tennessee throughout his adult life. I was told he wants this job, not from him. I know he was on the show. I'm not claiming I have any close relationship with him, but I was told by many people that this was the job that he was coveting. I don't know how you possibly hire him now because he has rules violations dating back to his Ole Miss days. How do you justify firing Jeremy Pruitt and saying, we can't have you here because you're breaking the rules, and you bring in a coach that was accused of rules violations at Ole Miss, even if, again, I'm not saying he did anything wrong or he was found to do anything wrong, but clearly there were rules that were broken, and so because of that, I don't think you can hire Hugh Freeze as a candidate. I'll take it a step further. I don't think you can hire Lane Kiffin. Now, I don't know if Lane Kiffin would even be interested in coming, but he is a name that I think Tennessee fans, they see how he has evolved as a head coach from his career beginning at Tennessee in college football to now. But I don't know how you can hire Lane Kiffin. Lane Kiffin, remember, there were rules violations under Lane Kiffin a decade ago at Tennessee, and so I think he is out of the question. So I think now the conversation becomes, okay, who can you realistically get, taking out the guys that either have a great job or have NCAA problems in the past? I think there's two types of coaches that come to mind. The first are the group of five guys, right? And it's what I said a minute ago. Look, there are a lot of good group of five jobs, but there are only 14 SEC jobs, but only about 13, maybe 12, 11 that are worth taking when you knock out Vanderbilt and some of the other coaching jobs. And so I think, one, is there a group of five guy out there? Jamie Chadwell at Coastal Carolina is coming off an 11-1 regular season, has built the foundation of a solid program there. Grew up right around Knoxville. He's in the next state over in South Carolina. Is he the kind of guy that you go get? Luke Fickell at Cincinnati, I think he's completely out of the question, but you got to obviously make a phone call to him. And there are obviously some other group of five guys that you might be interested in. Billy Napier, who is at Louisiana, 11 wins in 2019, 10 wins in 2020. I swear, I must be like the head of the Billy Napier fan club because I talk about this guy every single freaking week on this show, and nobody knows anything about him. But when you have back-to-back 10-win seasons at the group of five level, he coached under Saban, he coached under Dabo Swinney, he's going to get one of these big-time jobs eventually. But he seems to be very picky about what he is and is not interested in. I don't know if he would be interested in this job, but he's another name to keep an eye on from the group of five pool. Finally, there are, of course, the retread head coaches who are currently unemployed. And those are the guys that I think are I don't want to say more or less realistic than the group of five guys, but I think there's a possibility that you could end up with one of them. Is Gus Malzahn interested in this job? And I know Gus Malzahn, we have Auburn fans that listen to this show. People roll their eyes. Gus Malzahn, how could you ever hire Gus Malzahn? I mean, the guy wasn't terrible, right? Like, he won a couple SEC West titles. He played for a national championship. He beat Nick Saban a few times, which I do believe is worth mentioning. And he's a guy, listen, I mean, he doesn't recruit the same types of players as Alabama, Georgia, etc. And so maybe he's the kind of guy that with scholarship limitations or under the cloud of NCAA, uncertainty where it's going to be hard to recruit, maybe he's a guy that you bring in. I'll give you another name that I don't think is terrible. Tom Herman, the former Texas head coach. And look, I know that about 3 or 4 episodes ago, I crushed Tom Herman when he was fired at Texas. And if you're a Texas fan, I understand why you wanted this guy gone. As I said, he wasn't great. He wasn't as good as advertised. He wasn't recruiting well in Texas. And there was clearly a disconnect between him and his players. But I think you also have to call a spade a spade. The guy won 10 games one year. They would have gone 8-3 this year, mid-pandemic. And so it's not as though that he is a terrible candidate. When I say they would have gone 8-3, they went 7-3. Their game against arguably the worst team in the Power 5, Kansas, was knocked off the schedule. And so because of it, is Tom Herman a candidate for the head coaching job here? So I think it's going to be fascinating to watch. But like I said, I do think it's going to take a while before we get any clarity on who is even a candidate for this job, because I do think you have to hire an AD first. 2 quick thoughts before we get out of here on Tennessee. One, I know it's dark times for Tennessee, and it's frankly been like, a dark 15 to 18 years since they've really been relevant in the early 2000s. I don't think this is a bad job, though, right? Like, everyone wants to throw dirt on Tennessee. Oh, they'll never be good again. Let me just tell you this. Brian Kelly has flipped my head on who will be good and who will not be good in college football going forward, right? Because I was told for 20 years that Notre Dame will never be relevant again nationally. And you can argue, yeah, they don't beat Alabama, they don't beat Clemson at full strength, whatever. But Brian Kelly is the perfect coach for Notre Dame, and he has them in the national championship hunt year in and year out. If you can win at Notre Dame with those recruiting restrictions, with the academic restrictions, with the fact that you're in the middle of nowhere, small Catholic school, if you can win at Notre Dame and build a national championship contender, you can do it at Tennessee at a school that is a 3-hour drive to Atlanta, a 3-hour drive to Charlotte, a 3-hour drive to all over South Carolina where there are a number of quality recruits. Same with the Nashville area. If you can build a national championship contender at Notre Dame, you can build one at Tennessee. It's just going to take the right guy, and whether they get that guy or not, I don't know. It remains to be seen, but the bottom line is that it can be done. That is my first thought. My second thought is there's a lot of national media members taking a victory lap because they were pushing for Schiano 3 years ago when Jeremy Pruitt got hired. What I would say is just stop. Just stop with that. Look, two things in life. I say it all the time, but I think it's an important life lesson for all of us. Life is not an either-or proposition in most cases, right? It's not a rom-com, right? I chose the wrong girl and I let the right girl get away. That's not how life works. And so I saw a lot of national media members, you know who they are, taking victory laps. Oh, we told you, you dumb Tennessee fans, you thought you were so smart because you didn't want Greg Schiano there. Well, no, stop it. Stop it. Clearly, Jeremy Pruitt was not the right hire. It's not debatable at this point. But this idea that somehow national media members are taking a victory lap over Greg Schiano is ridiculous. This guy is a New Jersey guy. He's going to do well at Rutgers, but he was never going to make it in the SEC, and he was never going to make it in the SEC East every single year when he had to recruit against Nick Saban, when he had to recruit against Kirby Smart, when he had to recruit against Dan Mullen, who was who was hired at Florida the same year as Jeremy Pruitt. It was never going to happen. So stop with the Greg Schiano crap. Two things in life can be true. It's not necessarily if you hire this guy, you should have hired that guy. No. Greg Schiano would have been a disaster. I don't know if there would have been NCAA violations, but the bottom line is Schiano would have been a disaster. Pruitt was a disaster, but one does not equate